It's been a Tasmanian success story. Farmed Atlantic salmon began in the mid-1980s after a government report concluded it could be successfully developed in the state. From the first commercial harvest of around 53 tonnes, it now produces more than 30,000 tonnes a year with a value of around $380 million. There are plans to grow it even more. The state government has been a vocal supporter of the industry since it began and has now introduced amendments to the planning laws giving the minister greater power to approve expansion plans. The oily pink-fleshed fish is a favourite in kitchens and restaurants across Australia.
It's a growing industry. It's a sustainably growing industry. We now about $400 million a year, so about 40,000 tonnes of fish per year.
Spruiked by industry and politicians alike.
Gives Tasmania's reputation a great boost with respect to the production of this important protein resource, and obviously allows us to continue to market Tasmania as a producer of clean food.
In gloomy economic times, Primary Industries Minister Brian Greene is keen to promote its contribution to the state.
The whole salmon industry is obviously extremely important, employing 1,000 people now.
And there are substantial expansion plans on the table.
We plan to grow sustainably and keep on growing. We're looking at all options of how to grow, but it's all underpinned by sustainable practices with keeping a watch on the environmental sustainability, but also looking at the economic and social sustainability of the places that we operate in.
There's currently a proposal to increase the size of farms in Macquarie Harbour on the west coast by 360 hectares. That has some people worried.
This is the biggest proposed fish farming expansion in Tasmania's history to date, and it is in an area that is extremely unique in that it has the endemic and endangered Maugean skate. We know at least that one species is only found in 2 areas and is endangered.
Environment Tasmania's Rebecca Hubbard is concerned about potential impacts on the harbour.
That means there could be a lot of nutrients going into that water. There could be algal blooms or other impacts from those excess nutrients. There's also potential environmental impacts from antifoulants, which are heavy metals applied to nets, and antibiotics, which are given to the fish.
Christine Materia is a scientist who's worked for federal and state governments. She's now a resident of Woodbridge in the D'Entrecasteaux Channel and campaigned earlier this year against the expansion of a salmon farm at nearby Soldiers Point. The Marine Farming Planning Review Panel rejected the expansion application.
I guess back when we had the decision in March, we were concerned about what would happen next, given it was the first time that the Marine Farming Review Panel had actually said no to a proposed development.
Currently, the Independent Marine Farming Review Panel has the power to refuse an application to expand a fish farm or recommend to the Minister it be approved. If the panel refuses the application, like it did at Soldiers Point, the company has no grounds of appeal except in the Supreme Court. But last week, the Lower House of Parliament passed an amendment to change that.
Well, the issue really came about as a result of the panel rejecting the Soldiers Point amendment and highlighting that the Minister had no discretion with respect to that process.
Amendments to the legislation disregard or have the capacity for the Minister to totally disregard scientific evidence and the decision of the panel and make it a political decision, a decision that's based on politics and not necessarily on sound science.
The bill passed the Upper House last night. An amendment by the independent member for Murchison, Ruth Forrest, was agreed to by the government. It means that if the Minister doesn't agree with the panel's recommendation, his reasons must be tabled in Parliament within 15 sitting days. The Greens voted against the bill in the Lower House, warning the consequences could be dire.
because it'll mean that there'll be unbridled opportunities for developers of fish farms to be able to apply to a compliant minister and perhaps get an approval that ought not have been granted if there'd been a proper process of consideration.
There's no way that we want to undermine the process with respect to arriving at sensible decisions on planning when it comes to marine farming. And the process in itself remains exactly the same.
The upshot is, though, you would have the capacity to override the panel's decision.
Well, it would provide flexibility in terms of arriving at a decision.
The Minister maintains he would not override the panel's decision if it would mean a significant impact on the environment.
But if there are decisions that might need to be made around the edges with respect to where the actual farm sits within the plan and a range of other things, well then of course, you need some discretion in that regard.
Christine Materia's not convinced.
I think that giving the Minister the power to override the decision of the science decision firstly, and then secondly the panel, it could be seen very similarly to the situation with the pulp mill legislation.
Did the industry lobby the government at all for these amendments?
No, it's the government looking at just updating their process, making some more consistent, or giving consistency to the process, and giving some certainty back to industry that when a significant investment is made into looking at changing marine farming planning, that they can be recognised for that effort that they've put in.
Yes, he was the Minister.
The Tasmanian Conservation Trust's John Bryan says the existing legislation doesn't give the community enough say.
This moves the planning decisions even further away from that process, right into the hands of the Minister.
Mr Bryan says aquaculture should not be getting special treatment.
I would suggest that the legislation itself needs a proper review, and that the outcome of that, in my view, should be that aquaculture planning should be brought into the mainstream planning process in Tasmania.
It definitely sets those extractive industries outside of a proper planning process and really effectively destroys the integrity of a planning system by removing and giving exemptions such as they do with the forestry, mining and aquaculture industries. And at the end of the day, you might as well get rid of your whole planning scheme if you're just going to simply hand it over to the control of a minister who, by fiat or cronyism, can decide simply to approve a project.
When you've got discretion, the minister's got discretion to reject a plan or an amendment if the marine farm planning panel actually agree with the farm. So
But that's never happened.
Oh yeah, well, but if the Greens were running Tasmania, it might.
The public can comment on the Macquarie Harbour expansion plans until the middle of next month.